Someone who loves you has called you avoidant. Maybe a therapist did. Maybe a partner, in the middle of an argument that went too far. And the worst part, some part of you didn't argue back. Because you do pull away. You do need more space than most people seem to need. You do go quiet when others go loud. But here's what no one stopped to ask. What if pulling away isn't fear? What if the silence isn't defense? What if the space you need isn't a symptom, but simply the shape of who you are? Avoidant attachment entered mainstream conversation quietly, and then all at once. John Bowlby's attachment theory, later expanded by Mary Ainsworth, gave us a map of how early relationships shape the way we connect as adults. The avoidant type, someone who learned early on that closeness wasn't safe, that needing people leads to disappointment, became one of the most recognized patterns in modern psychology. And somewhere along the way, it became a catch-all. If you need solitude, you're avoidant. If you take time to trust people, you're avoidant. If intimacy feels complicated, if small talk drains you, if you disappear for days to recover, avoidant. The word became a diagnosis for anyone who didn't love the way the majority loves. And for otroverts, people who were already spending their lives being misread, this label landed with particular weight. Because unlike most labels, this one came from people who cared. It came from therapists, from partners, from books they read at 3 a.m. trying to understand themselves. And that made it stick. Here's what genuine avoidant attachment looks like. Not the pop psychology version, the clinical one. A person with avoidant attachment wants connection, deeply. But the moment the connection gets real, the moment someone gets close enough to matter, an alarm goes off. Not a preference, not a choice, a reflex. The pullback is involuntary. It happens before the thought does. And it's always followed by a specific kind of tension. The conflict between wanting to stay and everything inside pushing you toward the door. That internal war between wanting closeness and fleeing it is the signature of avoidant attachment. Now here is what the otrovert experiences. Not a war, a preference. The otrovert doesn't flee closeness because it's dangerous. They move towards solitude because it's where they actually live. There is no alarm. There is no tension between wanting and running. There is simply a deep and honest knowledge of what they need to remain whole. Imagine someone who grew up in a cold country, telling someone from the tropics that they must be afraid of the sun, simply because they don't chase it the way everyone else does. The logic sounds reasonable from the outside. From the inside, it misses everything that matters. There's one question that separates these two experiences more cleanly than any checklist. When you are alone, truly alone, no obligations, no one expecting anything, do you feel relief? Or do you feel the absence of something? The person with avoidant attachment, even in solitude, carries the relationship with them. The anxiety doesn't fully switch off. The mind keeps running the conversation, anticipating the return, managing the distance. The otrovert in solitude expands. Something settles. Something opens. The noise that's always present in social spaces finally goes quiet. And in that quiet, they become most fully themselves. There's a second distinction worth sitting with. Think about a relationship, a friendship, a partnership, anyone you've genuinely let close. Did you let them in slowly because something in you feared what would happen if you did? Or did you let them in slowly because that is simply how depth works for you? Because trust isn't given, it's built, layer by layer, until it becomes something real. Fear moves away from connection. The otrovert moves toward it, just at a different pace, and on completely different terms. Here's what I want to say directly. When someone who loves you calls you avoidant, they are usually not wrong about what they're seeing. They are wrong about what it means. They see the distance. They see the silence. They see you choosing solitude over company in moments they wish you wouldn't. And they translate that through their own architecture, through a framework that says, closeness is the goal, and anything that moves away from it must be a wound. But the cost of accepting that translation is enormous. When you spend years believing your solitude is a symptom, you stop trusting yourself. You start performing closeness instead of creating it. You show up in the ways you think you should, rather than the ways you actually can. And the relationships built on that performance never quite feel real, because they weren't built on you. They were built on the version of you that was trying to prove it wasn't broken. You are not avoidant. You are someone who experiences the world at a depth that most social structures were not designed for. That depth requires space. It requires quiet. It requires relationships built on something more solid than proximity and frequency. None of that is a fear response. None of that is damage. It is architecture. And the moment you stop trying to renovate yourself into something you were never built to be, something changes. Not in the people around you, in you. You stop apologizing for needing what you need. You stop shrinking your solitude into something manageable for others. You stop explaining the silence as if it were a problem that needs solving. The silence was never the problem. The wrong map was. If this is your first time here, the previous videos will give you the full picture of what otroversion actually is, and why so many people with this wiring spend decades misreading themselves. I'll see you in the next one. Elsewhere Minds, for those who never quite fit in.